I feel like we're on the cusp of another such breakthrough, and that is impact and effectiveness. And how do we get there, right? How do we now go from just putting documents on the internet, which is a given, to how do we really evaluate the impact of the work of a nonprofit so that funds flow to the most impactful organizations? And that's sort of why we're all here today. So just to show of, before I get started, just a show of hands, how many of you guys are with a nonprofit? Okay, and how many of you guys are on the corporate side? Okay, great. All right, so let's start the discussion with a question for the panel. So in the study that Steve brilliantly talked about, there is this, from the nonprofit perspective, they get what they need to do, right? Just don't necessarily know how to do it, how to leverage some of the tools that are out there, and more importantly, how to do it with shrinking funds, and this concept out there that is still alive and well, unfortunately, that says administrative costs and overhead should be very low, okay? So what's a nonprofit to do about that? I'm going to direct that to you, Tom.
Thanks, Deb. I work with a lot of not-for-profits. They're the main part of my client base. And there's a gap here. I mean, nonprofits, I think, see the opportunity. And also, when we talk about nonprofits, we should qualify it, because there are national nonprofits who are well-staffed and maybe more able to deal with some of the questions that we have here. And then there's everybody else. And they are all challenged by dealing with impact, defining what engagement means, even so far as having a 5-year strategic plan, which is what a lot of funders want to see now. And one thing that I'm noticing that lines up with the excellent research in Snapshot is that beyond the corporate world, even areas like community foundations, family foundations, major donors, they're all looking for the same things too. So this really aligns with it, and the organizations, I think, struggle with it. I think they are not so much helpless, but they are running 100 miles an hour on a short track, so that it's really tough to provide the resources necessary, the time necessary. Some of this stuff can't be rushed. You can't rush through what does engagement mean for our work. I sit on the board of a pretty good-sized not-for-profit in the Bronx called BronxWorks. But their budget's about $38–39 million a year. The lion's share of the funds are public funds. They serve a very poor community from early childhood to old age. And they do phenomenal work. And the Bronx, they work in the poorest congressional district in the U.S., which when I was a reporter in the Bronx was still the poorest congressional district in the U.S. But it's changed a lot. It's a lot better. But engaging with companies, despite their good work, despite the iconic name of the Bronx, despite everything that they do, is really tricky. And they tend to engage around matching gifts at gala time. And they can't break through. So, and they're a pretty good sized organization with a really dedicated staff. I mean, most people have been working there for a long time. So, and the clients that I work with deal with it, with a very similar question. They know the direction that everything's moving. They all read the Stanford Social Innovation Review and my column in Forbes. There's a plug. So they see where the trend lines are, and they see this freight train out there, and they think that only organizations like Charity Water are together enough with their story and kind of slick enough to be able to go after it. I want to kind of wrap up these initial comments by congratulating America's Charities on Snapshot. I think this is going to stand as a very important piece of research for the next few years, because it boldly, in my view, focused on the charitable side, focused on charities, focused on nonprofits. I think that was really smart. And I think it successfully looked at the idea of employee engagement and corporate involvement from the charity side of things, and saw it accurately as part of a larger picture. And charities are going after annual campaigns, in some cases capital campaigns, major gifts, planned giving, events, God knows, too many events, and corporate funding. And it's really tough. I do think that the tools, as Deb alluded to, I think that the tools that are out there are going to be really interesting. Getting the lion's share of the mid-sized nonprofits, a lot of whom work locally and regionally, to actually use them and use them smartly and use them well, I think that's a big job. And I think that's a job that's going to take leadership. So I'm really happy to see America's Charities focus on this.
Perla.
Yeah, I think that is such a great question, Deborah, because most of the nonprofits we work with, whether or not they're national or they're local, they're struggling with the issue of resources. I have, 100, social media sites where I could potentially raise money. How do I keep that data fresh over those 100 sites? And that's where, intermediaries come in, where, GuideStar being the distribution system for a lot of profile data about nonprofits, great nonprofits. We share data with GuideStar as well as 7 other different platforms so that you update your information in one place and then it gets disseminated to multiple places. So for Great Nonprofits Reviews, for instance, we have a bi-directional API so that you can update your information on Great Nonprofits or update your information, your reviews with GuideStar, and they all show up everywhere. So it saves nonprofits that time of having to duplicate their information multiple places. And I think that's the new era where we're in is, how can we make it efficient and worthwhile for the nonprofits to be accountable, to be transparent? Because if they have to report, different metrics in different places and, reviews are not standardized across different places, then, the whole accountability and transparency, cost-benefit ratio kind of breaks down. And so as a sector, we need to think about, how can we really think about sharing data, sharing information about impact? And I liked also the report very much in that, it's the report really says very clearly there's a tie-in between transparency, accountability, and what donors want. And I actually think there's also a tie between accountability, transparency, and actually inspiration, right? Because the impacts, when you do report your impacts, donors get inspired, right? And, when I go out and I talk to corporations, they always tell me, we're looking for inspirational material to promote to our employees. And, what employee gets excited about low overhead ratios, right? No one goes out, to volunteer because, this organization has low overhead ratios, the lowest overhead ratios, right? People go out to volunteer or to give because of impact, because the community is going to be better, because the kids are going to be better off, because the elderly are going to get better meals. That's why they do it, not because of low overhead.
Could I just add to that? I think it's important because what we found in the report, I think, is what's being echoed up here, is that if you were to talk to a nonprofit organization, they would say, we've always provided data. We've talked about our administrative costs. We talk about what we're doing in the community, the number of people served or so forth. But I think it's now how they're telling that, and it's a story now that's being told. How do we take what we're doing and make it meaningful, make it have inspiration? And I think the other thing that we're seeing happen is that now, as information is available, is that they're relying upon, and particularly at the workplace, but also in the public at large, they're having other people tell their story. We learned that one of the greatest things you can do is to tell somebody's story. So as a friend, if I tell my friend, then that's meaningful, that's impactful. So tell the story in a way that can be shared.